When World War II ended in 1945, Japan was a devastated country. Cities were flattened by bombing. Food was scarce. Millions of people struggled every day just to survive. American soldiers poured into Japan as part of the occupation. They lived on bases, worked in cities, and moved through neighborhoods that were still rebuilding from the ground up. In the middle of all this, something unexpected happened. Relationships began to form between Japanese women and American servicemen. Some were brief, some were complicated, and some became serious, leading to marriages that seemed impossible only a few years earlier. These couples faced enormous pressure: cultural barriers, legal restrictions, social judgment, immigration barriers, and a world that was still trying to understand what it meant to move from wartime enemies to something closer to partners. Today, we are going to look at the lives of these Japanese war brides, who they were, why they made the choices they did, how they were treated, and what happened to them after the war. It is a story of courage, isolation, discrimination, hope, and reinvention. For many of these women, leaving Japan to start a new life in the United States was both the hardest decision they ever made and the most defining one. Let's start with the earliest days of the occupation, life immediately after the war. When American troops arrived in Japan in September 1945, the country was still in shock. Civilians had been told for years that Americans were brutal. Many people expected violence or harsh treatment. Instead, most Japanese civilians experienced something very different. American soldiers often smiled, waved, and offered small gifts like candy or gum to children. They brought in food supplies and helped rebuild infrastructure. This shift created a strange mix of fear and curiosity. American soldiers were new and unfamiliar. Some Japanese civilians kept their distance. Others became more comfortable as time went on, especially younger people who were eager to move past the trauma of wartime propaganda. Women in particular found themselves interacting with Americans more often than they expected. Some worked in bars, restaurants, laundries, and stores near American bases. Others served as cleaners, cooks, translators, or office workers. These jobs were often a lifeline. Many families had lost fathers, brothers, or sons in the war. Women suddenly carried the responsibility of supporting the household. In this environment, it was almost inevitable that relationships would form. Who were the war brides? Japanese war brides came from many backgrounds. Some were city women who worked in shops or offices. Others were from rural areas and moved to bigger towns for work. Some came from poor families and saw marriage as a way to secure stability. Others came from middle-class households and simply fell in love with someone unexpected. A few things were common. Funde were generally young. They were more open to American culture than older generations. They were living in a society that was rapidly changing. Love stories grew slowly at first. Many people could not believe that a Japanese woman and an American man would choose to marry. Language barriers made communication difficult, but people found ways around it. Gestures, basic English, and patient conversation bridged the gap. Some relationships were genuine from the start. Others began out of necessity or convenience and later deepened. Every story was different, but almost immediately, these couples faced enormous obstacles. The stigma and judgment in post-war Japan. In the early years of the occupation, relationships between Japanese women and American soldiers were controversial. Many Japanese civilians felt humiliation after defeat and believed such relationships symbolized surrender. On a personal level, families sometimes rejected daughters who dated American men. Neighbors whispered. Co-workers judged. Women who walked with an American soldier in public often felt eyes on them. Some were confronted. Others were ignored by people who once treated them warmly. The stigma came from several places. National pride was wounded. Wartime propaganda had demonized Americans. Again, people feared exploitation or dishonor. Cultural expectations about purity and modesty were strong. Despite the challenges, many couples stayed together. Real affection overcame the barriers. But then they faced another problem. The American military did not make marriage easy. Restrictions from the American military. In the first years of the occupation, American servicemen needed permission from the US military to marry Japanese women. And that permission was very hard to get. At first, marriages between Americans and Japanese civilians were discouraged, then effectively blocked. The US military feared political backlash. Many Americans still saw Japan as the enemy. There were also racist immigration laws in place at the time. These laws made it almost impossible for Asian spouses to enter the United States. Soldiers who wanted to marry had to go through background checks, interviews, and months of waiting. Japanese women had to prove they were not involved in prostitution, communist activity, or anything considered politically risky. Some soldiers gave up. Some couples married in secret. Others waited patiently, believing that things would eventually change. And they did, lifting the ban and the first legal marriages. By 1947, American policy began to shift. The United States realized that building a strong relationship with Japan was important for the emerging Cold War. Social integration was now seen as beneficial rather than dangerous. Restrictions on marriage eased. Military authorities began issuing approvals. Although slowly at first, the real breakthrough came in 1952, when the Immigration and Nationality Act allowed Japanese spouses of American soldiers to immigrate to the United States more easily. This opened a new door for Japanese war brides. Between the late 1940s and the mid-1950s, thousands of Japanese women married American servicemen and prepared for a journey that would completely change their lives. But leaving Japan was not simple. The emotional weight of leaving home. For many war brides, deciding to leave Japan was the hardest part of the journey. They had to say goodbye to their families, often forever. International travel was expensive and complicated. Most Japanese families could not afford to visit America, and Japanese war brides rarely returned home. Parents worried deeply. Would their daughters be safe? Would American families accept them? Would their marriage survive? Many mothers cried during the farewell. Fathers gave advice. Siblings wrote letters filled with hope and fear. To prepare for departure, women received medical examinations, paperwork screenings, and orientation sessions. They learned basic English phrases. They studied American customs. They packed only a few belongings. Some carried photographs, hairpins, or small gifts from parents. Most of these women had never left Japan before. Many had never been on a ship or plane. Now they were crossing an ocean to a place they had only seen in military magazines or heard about from their husbands. The journey itself became a defining moment. The journey to America. Early war brides traveled by ship. The voyage could take more than 2 weeks. These ships carried dozens or hundreds of women who were all experiencing the same mix of excitement and anxiety. On these ships, ITTD women practiced English with each other. They shared stories about how they met their husbands. 5D, they comforted those who were nervous or homesick. 5D formed friendships that lasted for decades. Later, as air travel became more common, war brides flew to the United States. For many, it was their first time on an airplane. But stepping onto American soil brought a whole new set of challenges. Life in the United States, a new world. When Japanese war brides arrived in America, they were stepping into a completely foreign culture. Language was the biggest challenge. Most brides spoke English. Even basic conversations could feel overwhelming. American customs could be confusing. Food was different. Social expectations were different. People often spoke directly, in a way that felt rude or blunt to Japanese women. Many brides moved into parts of the country where Asian people were rare. Neighbors stared. Some refused to speak to them. Others avoided them in shops or church. But not all experiences were negative. Many Japanese war brides found supportive communities. Some American families embraced them. Some neighbors helped them learn English or adjust to the new environment. Children often became bridges between cultures. Still, daily life was not easy, facing racism and prejudice. Anti-Japanese racism was still strong after the war. Many Americans had lost family members in the Pacific. Wartime propaganda had dehumanized Japanese enemies, and the anger had not entirely faded. Japanese war brides often encountered the racial slurs, some exclusion from community events, some hostility from strangers, disapproval from in-laws, some difficulty, renting homes, some discrimination in stores or schools. Some brides were told they were not welcome at certain churches. Others were asked to leave restaurants. Children were sometimes bullied. Yet many brides responded with quiet determination. They focused on raising their families, learning the language, and building a new life. With time, many communities softened. As Americans got to know these women personally, stereotypes broke down. And as they built families, war brides became part of the cultural fabric of post-war America, building families and raising children. Most Japanese war brides had children within the first few years of marriage. These children grew up with a unique identity. At home, they heard Japanese phrases and ate Japanese food. Outside, they lived fully American lives. Many war brides worked hard to maintain their cultural traditions. They taught their children how to bow, how to use chopsticks, how to speak simple Japanese, and how to respect elders. They shared stories about life in Japan. They celebrated New Year, the Japanese way, with special foods and customs. But many brides also felt pressure to assimilate. Some stopped speaking Japanese to avoid drawing attention. Some changed their clothing style. Some avoided teaching their children too much Japanese culture out of fear they would be seen as outsiders. In the end, each family found its own balance. Over time, Japanese war brides became known for their resilience. They built communities across the country, war bride communities and social networks. War brides often found each other. They wrote letters, met near military bases, and formed clubs or social circles. These gatherings became emotional lifelines. They shared recipes. They exchanged advice about American customs. They helped each other learn English. They supported each other during moments of loneliness or cultural frustration. Some groups eventually formalized into war bride associations. These organizations preserved memories, organized events, and helped newer brides adjust to American life. These networks created a sense of belonging that many women could not find anywhere else. Bringing Japanese culture to America. Japanese war brides played a major role in introducing Japanese culture to the United States in the post-war years. They taught Americans about tea-fi Japanese cooking, tea culture, fair-folding origami, traditional holidays, etiquette and politeness, fetting kimono, and textile traditions. Sapphire Japanese language basics. Before the era of sushi restaurants and anime, most Americans knew very little about Japanese traditions. War brides were often the first Japanese person their neighbors ever met. Through simple acts like sharing food at a potluck or explaining a holiday, they slowly helped shift American perceptions of Japan. This cultural bridge was an unplanned but powerful effect of the war bride generation. But their experiences were not the same everywhere. For many, the hardest moments came later in life. The struggle with isolation. Even after decades in the United States, many war brides lived with a sense of isolation. Their families remained thousands of miles away. Some never saw their parents again after leaving Japan. Letters were their only connection for years. Homesickness never fully disappeared. Language barriers never vanished for some women. They managed daily life, but deep conversations in English were difficult. Some brides felt like outsiders even after living in the United States for 50 years. Others struggled with the expectation to be quiet, polite, and loyal no matter what. They carried the emotional weight of two cultures and tried to hold their families together through every challenge. Yet almost all of them showed remarkable strength. Their marriages, although mixed and sometimes pressured by outside judgment, often proved stable and loving. Many couples stayed together for life, returning to Japan later in life. For many war brides, returning to Japan after decades away was emotional. Some visited only after their children were grown. Others waited until they were in their 60s or 70s. When they returned, Japan had changed dramatically. Cities were modern and crowded. Traditions felt different. Families had aged. Parents had passed away. Siblings had built lives of their own. Some war brides felt like visitors in their own homeland. Others found comfort in reconnecting with relatives. Many expressed gratitude for being able to stand on Japanese soil again after so many years. But their home was now in two places: legacy and impact. Today, the story of Japanese war brides is better understood and more widely recognized. Their children and grandchildren have documented their experiences in books, documentaries, and oral history projects. Many Americans of mixed Japanese heritage trace their origins to these marriages. War brides contributed to us military communities, schools, workplaces, and neighborhoods. They helped open cultural exchanges between Japan and the United States, long before formal diplomacy strengthened those ties. Their courage, adaptability, and quiet strength helped reshape perceptions on both sides of the Pacific. They were not diplomats. They were not political figures. They were ordinary women who made extraordinary choices at a moment when the world was reshaping itself. And their stories deserve to be remembered. The story of Japanese war brides cannot be separated from the larger story of post-war Japan and the American occupation. It is a story of two cultures learning to see each other as human, rather than enemy. It is a story of women who left everything familiar to build lives in a foreign land. It is a story of families created across borders and identities formed through both struggle and love. What happened to Japanese war brides after the war was not simple. It was filled with joy, loss, prejudice, courage, and transformation. Their lives show how personal decisions can shape global history in quiet but powerful ways. And when we look back, we see that these women did more than marry American servicemen. They changed how two nations understood each other. They bridged cultures in a way that no policy or treaty could have done alone.